Some places from our childhood hold a kind of magic, tree houses, secret forts, or quiet wooded trails, but sometimes that magic twists into something darker. In today's episode, we explore unsettling true encounters, strange figures in the forest, bizarre relics in forgotten places, and eerie discoveries that leave more questions than answers. These stories are shared by real people who stumbled into the unknown and never saw the world the same way again. Get comfortable, because things are about to get strange. Story 1. The little one's green text from an on-be-me years-old sophomore in high school, back in a total we. Belong with my best friend Alex. We had known each other since we were like 5, both socially awkward, but whatever. At least we had each other. Alex came over to my house almost every weekend. We'd play video games, watch anime, normal dorky stuff. We were both into anime girls, but too awkward to talk to real ones, dude. I got all this rare crap from some guy in a Discord server, whatever. We're in computer lab, looking at his haul, mostly normal weeb stuff. Then he shows me this folder, labeled premium content. It's all perverted stuff, to say the least. Not even that bad by internet standards, but we were idiots and didn't notice Miss Peterson walking up behind us. What are you two looking at? Entire class turns around. Absolute mortification. We got sent to the principal's office. Our parents were called. Dad picked me up from school, and it was a silent car ride home. Alex's parents and mine are close, so they called each other Dad. Eventually spoke. I talked to Mr. Walker. You boys have 2 options: be grounded for a month, no internet, no games, or come hunting with me this weekend. Your choice, but you're both getting the same punishment. Alex and I texted each other. We agreed that hunting sounded better than being grounded. At least we'd be outside doing something. Neither of us had been hunting before, though. Dad was always into it, always tried to get me to go. I'd always said no. Guess this was his chance to force my hand. That Friday after school, Dad picked both of us up in his truck. It was an hour drive to his hunting cabin in northern Michigan, middle of absolute nowhere, no cell service, barely any houses for miles. The cabin is small, rustic, smells like pine and old cigarettes. Dad seemed excited, happier than I've seen him in a long time. This will make men out of you boys. I roll. We unpacked. Dad showed us the gear: rifles, hunting knives, camo clothes, orange vests. Gives us a lengthy safety lecture that lasts forever. Never point a gun unless you intend to shoot. Always identify your target. Stay within sight of each other. Normal hunting dad stuff. I suppose we heated up some canned stew for dinner, early to bed since we'd be waking up at AM, but I couldn't sleep. The woods make weird noises. Alex was snoring on the bunk above me. I finally drift off around midnight. Waking up at AM is brutal. Dad was already up and dressed, making coffee and oatmeal for us. Eat up, boys. We need energy for the day. We get dressed in all the hunting gear, feeling ridiculous in camo. Dad checks our rifles, shows us one more time how to use them safely. Remember, we're hunting deer, nothing else. We hike into the woods while it's still dark, flashlights pointing at the ground, dew soaking through my boots. It was cold as heck, could see my breath. We walked for maybe minutes and reached a small clearing. Dad sets up a blind for us to wait in. This is the boring part. Sit quiet and wait. The sun starts coming up around AM. Woods gradually become visible. Nothing really happening. Alex keeps fidgeting and Dad keeps giving him stern looks. Around AM, still nothing. Let's move on to another spot, Dad whispers. We pack up our minimal gear and start to walk. We go deeper into the forest, trees getting denser, less light coming through. I noticed the birds have stopped singing. Strange, but I didn't think much of it. Dad stopped suddenly, puts his finger to his lips, points ahead. I don't see anything at first. Then I notice movement about yards ahead. I was expecting to see a deer, but it's not a deer. Can't really tell what it is, too small, moving strangely. Dad motions for us to get down. We crouch down behind some fallen logs. He takes out his binoculars. He looks for a long time. His face changes. I'd never seen him make that expression before. It's a mixture of confusion and something else, fear. He hands me the binoculars. Tell me what you see. I look through the binoculars. I focus on the area where we saw movement. At first, nothing, and then I see them. 3 small figures between the trees, maybe FT tall. I thought they were children at first, but something was wrong about the way they moved, all jerky and strange. Their skin was pale, almost see-through. They wore no clothes, and I couldn't make out facial features. clearly. They seem to be collecting something from the ground. Mushrooms. Maybe I feel Alex nudging me. Let me see. I hand him the binoculars. I look at my dad. His face still had that weird expression. What are they? I whisper. I don't know, he says, voice different. Been hunting these woods for years. Never seen anything like that, Alex. Gasps. What the heck? What the heck? He keeps whispering. Dad takes the binoculars. Back we should go, I say. Dad doesn't respond, just keeps staring. Finally, he says, yes, but quiet, don't let them hear us. Start backing away slowly. Alex trips on a root, falls with a loud crash, and his rifle hits the ground. The sound echoes through the forest. Dad freezes, looks back toward where the creatures were. I do too. They've stopped moving. All three seem to have turned in our direction. Even from this distance, I can feel them looking at us. Dad whispers, run. We take off, crashing through underbrush. Don't care about being quiet anymore. Just need to get away. I can hear Dad and Alex behind me, and then Alex yells. I turn around. The idiot has fallen again, and Dad was stopping to help him keep going. Dad shouts at me back to the cabin. We'll catch up. I hesitate. Go, he screams. Never heard him yell like that before, so I run, heart pounding and lungs burning. No idea if I'm going the right way. Just running. Somehow find my way back to the cabin. I burst through the door, lock it behind me, grab Dad's shotgun from the rack. I load it like he taught me. My hand shakes so bad I drop shells on the floor. I sit facing the door and I wait. An hour passes, then another. The sun's starting to set. Panic is really setting in. I'm about to go look for them when I hear footsteps outside. I grip the shotgun tighter. The door handle turns. It's locked. Then I hear knocking. Son, it's us. Open up. Dad's voice. But there's something off about it, Dad. Yes, open the door. Alex is hurt. I hesitate. I go to the window and look out. There's Dad and Alex standing there. They look normal except for Dad's posture. There was something wrong about it too. Stiff. Alex won't look me in the eyes. What happened out there? I call through the door. We'll explain inside. Open the door. Dad's voice still sounds wrong in a way. Maybe it's a bit more flat, more emotionless. Alex, you okay? I ask. He nods, but doesn't speak. There's something wrong, but it's my dad and my best friend. Slowly, I unlock the door. They come inside. Dad immediately takes the shotgun from me. Don't need this now, he says, his voice becoming even flatter. Alex sits on the couch staring at the floor. What happened? I ask again. Dad starts packing our stuff. We're leaving now. But what were those things? Dad stops and turns to me. His eyes look different. I can't explain how, but they're not his eyes. What things? He asks. These small creatures we saw. We didn't see anything. There was a bear we ran. End of story. I know he's lying. I look at Alex. He finally meets my gaze and slightly shakes his head. The message was clear. Don't push it. We pack our things up in silence, then we drive home. No one speaks the entire hour trip. We drop Alex off at his place. I'll call you tomorrow. Say. He nods. Still won't really look at me. He gets out without even saying goodbye. Dad drives us home. Mom asks how the trip was. Fine. Dad says he goes straight to the basement and stays there all night. Alex doesn't call the next day or the day after, and I can't bring myself to call him like I promised. Not yet. When I see him at school, he acts weird and distant. Dude, what happened after I ran? Asked. Nothing. Like your dad said, it was just a bear. But his voice shakes. Alex, come on, we've been friends forever. He finally looks at me. Just drop it, okay, for your own good. He stops hanging out with me after that, and he even transfers to another school. A month later, never really talked to him again. Things at home get stranger. Dad spends most of his time in the basement. Now sets up a lock on the door. I can hear him talking to himself sometimes. And Mum notices it too. Your father's just going through something, she says, but she looks worried. Dad starts taking long walks at night, comes back with mud on his shoes, sometimes small scratches on his arms. He won't explain, and he stops going to work, loses his job, hardly speaks to either of us. When he does, his voice still has that flat quality to it. His movements are still stiff, not like they used to be, and his eyes are still wrong. I don't think he's my dad anymore. It's been months after the hunting trip. I wake up to the sound of screaming. I rush to my parents' bedroom. My mom is on the floor. Dad is standing over her, just watching. I call paramedics, say, it's a stroke, a severe one. Dad doesn't go to the hospital with us. He just stays home. Mom is in a coma for weeks. She dies, never wakes. Up at the funeral, Dad doesn't even cry. He stands apart from everyone. Several people comment on how different he seems. I try to talk to him about Mum, about anything. He just stares at me with those wrong eyes. It's natural, all part of the cycle. That's the only thing he says. Next year and a half is hell. Just me and not Dad in the house. He barely acknowledges me, spends most of his time locked in that basement. I smell strange. Things coming from in there, earthy and organic. Sometimes I hear scratching too, and I tell myself it's mice, but I know it's not. Sometimes strange packages arrive. Dad takes them straight to the basement. I find tiny footprints in mud by the back door, some mornings too small to be human, shaped like feet. Dad eats less and less. He starts to get thin, and his skin begins to look very, very pale. I count my days until my birthday, and I plan my escape. Finally, I turn and graduate. High school, I get accepted to a college in California, and I'll be moving as far away as possible. Dad doesn't even come to my graduation. I pack my things while he's on one of his night walks, planning to leave the next morning. That morning, Dad's in the basement. I knock on the door to say goodbye, but there's no answer. I leave a note instead, drive to California and start my new life. I try to forget, mostly succeed. My first semester goes well. I make new friends, normal friends, and I never tell anyone about what happened. Who's going to believe something like this first winter break? I don't want to go home, but I do want to get the rest of my stuff that I was in too much of a hurry to grab back then. So I drive back, and the house looks abandoned, grass overgrown, and the mail is piled up. Neighbors say Dad has not been there in months, haven't seen him whatsoever. I use my key. The house smells so moldy and earthy, like the basement smell, but everywhere Dad's room is empty. The closet is empty. There's no sign of him. I gather my things quickly, forcing myself to check the basement. A key to the lock is hanging on the nail beside the door, my hand shaking. As I unlock it, I steel myself open the door. The basement is empty, completely empty. Not even Dad's tools or workbench are. They're just concrete floor and walls, except for one thing, a small piece of paper in the center of the room. I pick it up. There are 3 words written in Dad's handwriting, the little ones. I panic and run. Upstairs, something catches my eye in the kitchen. Small footprints and dust on the floor. They lead to the back door. Multiple sets, different sizes. One large set mixed with them bare feet, but with too many toes. I call the police. They investigate. A missing persons report is filed. Adults have the right to disappear if they want to. Officer tells me they don't care about the footprints. Just another missing middle-aged man happens. All the time, they say, once I'm legally able to, I sell the house, and I never go back to my hometown. I finish college, get a job, normal life, and I still have nightmares about the woods, about Dad's wrong eyes, about small, pale figures moving between trees. Were they the little ones? Story 2. Trapped in the treehouse. I grew up in Peterborough, Ontario, about 3 hours northeast of Toronto. My parents bought our house when I was 4, mainly because the backyard was huge by suburban standards, almost half an acre, with mature trees and a creek running along the back edge of the property. The previous owners had left behind a treehouse, built between 2 massive oak trees near the back fence. My dad spent the first summer reinforcing it, adding better walls and a proper roof. By the time I was 8, it had become my favorite place in the world. The treehouse sat about 10 feet off the ground, accessible by a wooden ladder my dad had bolted to one of the oaks. It wasn't fancy, just a 10 by 10 platform with plywood walls and a slanted roof, but to me it felt like a castle. You could see the whole backyard from up there, plus the creek and the conservation area beyond our property line. My parents let me play up there unsupervised once I proved I could climb the ladder safely, though my mum insisted on checking on me every hour or so. The summer I turned 10 was when everything changed. My best friend at the time was Eric Lindstrom, who lived 3 streets over. We'd been friends since kindergarten, bonding over our shared obsession with dinosaurs and space. That July, Eric's parents were going through a messy divorce, so he spent most of his days at my house while his mum worked, and his dad had moved to an apartment downtown. We practically lived in that treehouse that summer, hauling up comic books, snacks, Eric's portable CD player, and spending entire afternoons up there. Sometimes we'd pretend we were astronauts in a space station. Other times we were explorers in the Amazon, normal kid stuff. The first strange thing happened in early August. We were up in the treehouse around sunset, reading old Goosebumps books when we heard something moving in the creek. It wasn't unusual. We often saw raccoons, skunks, or even the occasional deer, but this sounded bigger, splashing through the water rather than drinking from it. We peered out the window, really just a square cut in the plywood, but the sun was in our eyes and we couldn't see much. Eric suggested we climb down to investigate, but something made me hesitate. The splashing had stopped, replaced by a sound I couldn't quite identify. It was like heavy breathing mixed with a low, clicking noise. I told Eric we should stay put until whatever it was moved on. He called me a chicken, but he didn't climb down either. After about 10 minutes, the sounds faded. We eventually went back to our books, though I kept glancing out the window. When my mom called us in for dinner, we scrambled down the ladder and ran to the house without looking back. I didn't mention the noises to my parents. A few days later, Eric was sleeping over. We'd convinced my parents to let us sleep in the treehouse, something we'd been begging to do all summer. My dad strung up a camping lantern and made us promise to come inside if we got scared or if it started to rain. We hauled up sleeping bags, pillows, and enough junk food to last us a week. Around midnight, we were telling scary stories when we heard my neighbor's dog, Buster, start barking like crazy. Buster was an ancient beagle who barely moved anymore, so hearing him that worked up was strange. Then he went silent mid-bark, like someone had pulled his batteries out. Eric and I looked at each other. I asked if he thought something was wrong with Buster. He shrugged, but I could tell he was nervous too. We turned off the lantern and looked out the window toward the Cohens' yard. Their motion sensor light had come on, illuminating their back patio, but we couldn't see Buster anywhere. Then the light went out. A few seconds later it came on again, then off, on, off, like something was triggering it repeatedly. Eric whispered that maybe it was just a cat. I nodded, wanting to believe him, but cats don't usually set off those lights. You need something bigger. The light stopped flickering and stayed off. We waited, barely breathing, just listening for any sounds. And then we heard the breathing again, that same heavy, labored sound from the creek, but closer now. It seemed to be coming from our yard, somewhere below the treehouse. I grabbed Eric's arm and he didn't pull away. We sat frozen, afraid to move or make any noise. The breathing circled the tree, accompanied by the sound of something moving through the grass. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged. Every few seconds, there was that clicking noise, like teeth chattering but slower. Eric mouthed the word bear to me. We'd heard about black bears wandering into suburban areas sometimes, though I'd never seen one in Peterborough. I nodded, clinging to that explanation. A bear made sense. A bear was something real, something adults would understand. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, but it was probably only maybe 10 minutes at most. Then it just suddenly stopped. We waited another 10 minutes before Eric suggested we make a run for the house. I told him, no way. Whatever was down there might still be around. He didn't argue. We spent the night huddled in our sleeping bags, taking turns keeping watch. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made us jump. When dawn finally came, we practically flew down the ladder and ran inside. My mum found us on the couch, still in our sleeping bags, claiming we'd come in because of mosquitoes. I wanted to check the yard for tracks or signs of what had been there, but I was too scared to go look alone, and Eric refused to go with me. Later that day, while Eric was at his dad's apartment, I finally worked up the courage to investigate. The grass around the treehouse was matted down in a rough circle, like something large had been moving around it, but there were no clear footprints. No claw marks on the trees, nothing that might prove what we'd heard. Over the next week, more strange things happened. Our trash cans got knocked over twice by something, the contents scattered across the driveway, but it didn't look rummaged through like the way raccoons would do. I mean, the food wasn't even touched. Then there was the smell. It started to appear randomly, usually in the evening, thick and musty, like wet dog. It would hang in the air for a few minutes, then disappear completely. My mum thought a skunk might be living under our deck, but when Dad checked thoroughly, he found nothing. Eric and I avoided the treehouse for several days, but eventually we went back up. We told ourselves we were being babies, that it had just been a bear, or maybe a really big raccoon. But we only went up during bright daylight, and we always left well before sunset. The second major incident happened during another sleepover, this time in my actual bedroom. It was past midnight, and we were playing Nintendo when we heard something hit my window. Not hard, just a light tap. We paused the game and listened. Another tap, then another. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard. I had one of those big windows with a wide sill where I kept some toys and books. We crept over to look out, staying low. The moon was almost full, casting silver light across the yard. At first we saw nothing strange, but then Eric grabbed my shoulder and pointed. Something was moving near the treehouse. It was hard to make out details in the moonlight, but it looked tall, maybe 10 feet, and thin, too thin. It moved in a strange, jerky way, like it was unused to walking upright. As we watched, it approached the oak tree and began to climb, but it wasn't climbing our ladder. It was scaling the trunk itself, using long arms to pull itself up in quick, spider-like movements. Within seconds, it disappeared into the treehouse. We backed away from the window, terrified. Eric asked in a shaky voice what we should do. I said we should get my parents, but we didn't. We were 12-year-old boys, and some part of us knew that adults would not believe us. I knew we would be told we were seeing things, to go back to bed, that we had scared ourselves silly with those scary stories we liked so much. So we stayed in bed, staring at my window, waiting for something to happen. About an hour later, we saw it again. This time, it was on the ground, standing near the creek. Even from a distance, something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms hung down past where its knees should be. It stood there for several minutes, perfectly still, facing our house. Then it turned and walked into the conservation area, disappearing among the trees. We didn't sleep that night. In the morning, we tried to convince ourselves we'd imagined it, that the moonlight had played tricks on us. But when we finally went to check the treehouse later that day, we found things had been moved. Our comic books were stacked in a perfect pyramid in the center of the floor. The lantern, which we always kept hanging from a nail, was on the ground outside, placed carefully against the tree trunk. That was the last time either of us went up to the treehouse that summer. Eric started spending more time with his dad after that, and by September, when school started, we had drifted apart. He never talked about what we saw, and neither did I. My parents noticed I'd stopped playing in the treehouse and just assumed I'd grown out of it. These strange incidents continued sporadically through the fall. Our outdoor furniture would be rearranged overnight. My mum's garden gnomes would disappear and reappear in different spots. The clicking sounds and heavy breathing became occasional background noise on quiet nights, though I was the only one who seemed to notice. That winter, during a particularly bad ice storm, one of the oak trees split and fell, taking half the treehouse with it. My dad had the remains torn down for safety reasons. Honestly, I was secretly relieved. Whatever had been visiting our yard seemed to lose interest after that. The strange sounds stopped. The smell disappeared. Life went on. Years later, when I was in high school, I was doing some sort of natural science project and stumbled upon some information about the conservation area behind our house. It turned out that the area had once been part of a larger forest that the indigenous people had considered taboo. They told stories about tall, thin creatures that lived in the deep woods, beings that walked upright but were not human, beings that could climb trees like squirrels and make clicking sounds to communicate. I never found out exactly what Eric and I encountered that summer. Part of me wants to believe it was just overactive imagination, that we scared ourselves with shadows and normal animal sounds. But I'm not going to forget what we saw, even if I don't like to think about it. Story 3. Why I Hate Dogs, a story from Rennie. When I was a kid, my parents used to drop me off at my grandparents' house in Ridgewood almost every other weekend. Their house was an old 2-story colonial with dark wood paneling and far too many rooms for just 2 people. It always smelled like potpourri mixed with the scent of old books, along with whatever my grandmother was baking that day. It wasn't the worst place to spend time as a kid. I got spoiled with cookies and minimal supervision, but there was one thing that made my visits miserable: Jasper. Jasper was my grandfather Arthur's prized German Shepherd. My grandfather had gotten him before I was born, so by the time I was old enough to form memories, Jasper was already middle-aged for a dog. My grandfather had trained him for regional obedience competitions in his younger years. The den in their house was covered with ribbons and photos of Jasper, looking regal beside my beaming grandfather. To everyone else, Jasper was a well-behaved, impressive dog. To me, though, he was a nightmare. The first time I realized something was off about Jasper, I was about 4 years old. I was coloring at the kitchen table while my grandmother made lunch. Jasper was lying under the table, supposedly sleeping. I dropped a crayon by accident, and as I bent down to pick it up, Jasper's eyes snapped open. They weren't like normal dog eyes. They were cold and calculating. He didn't growl, nor did he bare his teeth, something that would have been easier to explain to the adults. Instead, he just stared at me with those piercing eyes, and I swear to you I saw him smile, not the happy, panting smile dogs usually have, but something more knowing, something mean. I yanked my hand back so fast that I hit it on the table. I tried to tell my grandmother, but she just laughed it off, telling me that Jasper loved children and was probably just playing with me. That was the beginning of a long pattern. Whenever the adults were watching, Jasper was perfectly behaved, but the moment their attention turned away, he was a different dog. My grandfather would always praise him, claiming that Jasper was the smartest dog he'd ever had, sometimes remarking that he thought Jasper understood everything they said. My grandmother was no better. She would feed him bits of meat by hand and speak to him in this ridiculous baby talk, calling him things like, "Does Jasper want another piece of chicken?" And then answering herself with, "Oh yes, he does." Meanwhile, I was doing everything I could to avoid being alone with that dog. I'd learned quickly that the grown-ups never believed me. After all, Jasper was such a good dog, as they kept saying, but I knew better. When I was 7, I was playing outside in the backyard while my grandparents worked in the garden. I had this action figure I was really into at the time. I put it down for a second to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, Jasper was standing over it. He stared at me for a long moment, and then, deliberately, he picked up the toy in his mouth. Slowly, methodically, he crushed it between his jaws, the plastic cracking loudly. Then, with his tail wagging, he dropped the broken remains at my feet and walked away like he'd done something clever. I ran crying to my grandmother, but instead of comforting me, she scolded me for leaving my toys where poor Jasper could mistake them for his own. My grandfather handed me $10 to buy a new one and told me to be more careful. The worst was yet to come, though. When I was 9, I was sleeping in the guest room upstairs. Around midnight, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, and I didn't want to wake anyone by turning on the lights. As I crept down the hall, I heard the click of nails on the hardwood floor. When I looked up, there he was, Jasper, standing at the end of the hallway, just a silhouette in the darkness. He was perfectly still, staring at me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The way he stood was wrong, too still, too purposeful. I stepped backward toward my room, and he took a step forward. I took another step back, and so did he, like some twisted mirror game. When I finally turned to run back to my room, I heard him coming after me, his nails clicking rapidly on the floor. I barely made it to my room and slammed the door behind me. There was a thud as he hit the door, then silence. I stood there, trembling, not daring to move. Then I heard it, scratching at the door, slow and methodical, not frantic as if he were drawing something. It went on for nearly an hour before finally stopping. In the morning, there were deep gouges in the bottom of the door. My grandfather was confused when I showed him, commenting that it wasn't like Jasper to do something like that. He seemed almost worried, but he didn't say much more. I didn't feel better, though. If anything, I was more scared than ever. When Jasper died, I wish I could say I was sad, but honestly, I was relieved. I was staying with my grandparents that weekend when it happened. Jasper had been acting strange all day, more aggressive than usual, pacing the house, growling at nothing. That night, my grandfather had to lock him in the basement because he wouldn't stop barking. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to complete silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong when you're used to hearing the normal creaks and groans of an old house. I realized I couldn't hear Jasper anymore. No barking, no pacing, nothing. In the morning, my grandfather found him at the bottom of the basement stairs, dead from a heart attack. The vet said it was common for his age and breed, but what the vet didn't see was the look on Jasper's face. His lips were pulled back in a snarl, his eyes wide open and staring at nothing. He didn't look peaceful. He looked angry. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Months later, when I came to stay with my grandparents again, I was horrified to discover something in the den. There, positioned near my grandfather's favorite chair, was Jasper, stuffed and mounted in a standing position. His fur had been carefully groomed, his posture regal, just like the photos from his competitions. But the taxidermist had done something wrong with his eyes. They were glass, yes, but they seemed to follow you around the room. My grandfather proudly asked if I thought Jasper looked magnificent, adding that now he would always be with them. My grandmother seemed less enthusiastic but went along with it, whispering to me that my grandfather couldn't bear to part with Jasper. This was his way of coping. That night, I heard it again, the click of nails on hardwood outside my room. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was just my imagination, but when my door slowly creaked open, I knew it wasn't. I sat frozen, staring at the gap, hoping not to see what I knew was coming, but I didn't see anything. When I gathered the courage to check the hallway, it was empty. I looked down toward the den and saw Jasper's mounted form, just as it had been earlier, but something was off. I closed my door, wedged a chair under the handle, and barely slept that night. The next morning, I found small, dusty paw prints outside my door. I showed my grandmother, but she just muttered something about the neighbor's cat somehow getting in. But we both knew the neighbors didn't have a cat. Over the next few years, my visits became increasingly terrifying. Objects would move around the house, usually my things, displaced or hidden. One time, I found my sneaker chewed up in the garden, covered in dirt and saliva. And the taxidermied Jasper? He never seemed to move, but sometimes I'd enter the den and find him facing a different direction. My grandfather would insist nothing had changed. The final straw came during spring break when I was 13. My grandparents had gone to bed early, leaving me to watch TV downstairs. I must have dozed off on the couch because I woke up around midnight. The TV was still on, flickering blue light across the room, and I felt the familiar feeling of being watched. Jasper's mounted form was gone from its usual spot. My heart raced. Maybe my grandfather had moved him for cleaning, I told myself, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I went upstairs quietly, each step on the old staircase creaking loudly in the silence. When I reached the top, I heard it, the clicking of nails on hardwood coming from my room. I should have run to my grandparents' room, but fear held me in place. I approached my bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and with a trembling hand, I pushed it open. There, in the center of my room, was Jasper, not the stiff, mounted version, but something else. He looked solid but wrong, like a poorly made photograph brought to life. His fur was dull, and his movements were jerky. But his eyes were just like I remembered, cold, calculating. When he saw me, his mouth opened into what I could only describe as a smile, revealing unnaturally white teeth in the darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only watch as he slowly approached me, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor with each step. When he was directly in front of me, he stopped. Then, faster than I could react, he lunged forward, grabbing a mouthful of my hair. The pain snapped me out of my paralysis. I screamed as he dragged me by my hair into the hallway. I clawed at the doorframe, desperate to hold on to something. My screams finally woke my grandparents. My grandfather rushed down the hall, and when he saw what was happening, his face drained of color. The moment the hallway light turned on, Jasper vanished. Just like that. Vanished. Not ran away, not hid. Vanished, as if someone had blown out a candle. I collapsed on the floor, sobbing. My grandmother helped me to my feet, while my grandfather stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Jasper had been. I asked him through my tears if he had seen it too. He nodded slowly, his face ashen, admitting that he had. He confessed that he'd experienced strange things too, objects moving, strange noises, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. He had dismissed it all, convinced it was just grief and imagination, but he confessed that he couldn't let go, and he thought that was what kept Jasper there. I never stayed overnight at my grandparents' house again. My parents didn't understand, but they respected my refusal. My grandfather eventually got rid of all of Jasper's things, the ribbons, the photos, everything. The only explanation he ever offered was that some things shouldn't be preserved. Years later, after both my grandparents had passed away and we were cleaning out their house, I found a small metal box buried in the garden under an unmarked stone. Inside was a dog collar, worn and faded, with the name Jasper barely visible on the tag. Next to it was a note in my grandfather's handwriting. Some doors, once opened, are hard to close. I buried the box right where I found it and never told anyone about it. Some things are better left undisturbed. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear the phantom sound of nails clicking on hardwood, and I know, deep down, that a part of Jasper is still out there waiting, but as long as his remains stay buried and forgotten, I think I'm safe. Story 4. We weren't alone in the building. It was Devil's Night in 2010, and I was hanging out with my boyfriend Evan and his best friend Ryan. It was that time of year when the air had a chill to it, and the moon hung like a pale lantern in the sky, making everything feel a little off-kilter. We didn't have a particular plan for the night, but as we were driving around, aimlessly passing through neighborhoods, the idea of doing something spooky came up. "How about we go ghost hunting?" Evan suggested with a grin, his voice betraying excitement. He was always up for an adventure, and Ryan, of course, was all in. We were all big fans of paranormal stuff, even if we were skeptical about the whole thing. Ghosts, spirits, and hauntings were just fun to talk about until they weren't. Where should we go, though? Ryan asked, tapping his fingers on the window. We need something with a real eerie vibe. I could feel the adrenaline starting to pump. How about that old tuberculosis hospital near here? I suggested, my heart skipping a beat at the thought. I'd heard rumors about the place. It was a huge, crumbling Gothic structure, abandoned for years. Supposedly, there were all kinds of stories about it being haunted. Evan's eyes lit up. Oh, hell yes, let's do it. We didn't waste any more time. Evan drove us over, and we parked at a bar down the street to keep our movements under the radar. The hospital's location was too well known, and we didn't want to draw attention. We got out, sneaking toward the back of the building, hearts racing as the thrill of doing something illegal, ghost hunting of all things, pumped through our veins. As soon as we stepped onto the property, the mood shifted. The air was heavier, colder. The wind whispered through the dead trees surrounding the hospital, and I immediately got a bad feeling in my stomach. It wasn't like your typical excitement from sneaking into an abandoned place. No, this was deeper, more unsettling. We made our way around the back, trying to find a way inside. After a couple of minutes, Ryan pointed out a loose piece of plywood over a window on the ground floor. Evan went in first, then Ryan followed, but as I squeezed through, I saw it. The shadows, the decay. It felt like the building was watching us. The first warning sign came immediately. As Ryan climbed through the window, he twisted his knee and winced in pain, but refused to stop. He was limping now, but still determined to go further. I'm good, it's fine, he grumbled, clearly trying to tough it out. But I was already feeling the unease creep up my spine. The room we entered had that old hospital smell, mold, decay, and the faint scent of antiseptic still clinging to the air. It looked like an abandoned waiting room, with chairs piled haphazardly along the walls and an old wheelchair sitting forlornly in the center. My mind raced with thoughts of the patients who had sat there, the people who had passed through these hallways. If they only knew what was coming. But despite the unsettling atmosphere, we pushed forward, moving deeper into the hospital. Evan led the way, and I stayed close behind, trying to keep my mind focused. We only had 2 flashlights between us, and Ryan, hobbling along, trailed behind. We had no real plan, no real map of the place, just our growing curiosity and a sense of thrill. As we walked down a long corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoed off the walls. The place felt frozen in time. Everything left exactly as it had been, like a sudden evacuation. I shined my flashlight into rooms, seeing old equipment still in place, decaying over time. In one room, I found old patient files, many of them charred, like someone had tried to burn the history away. Evan, always the brave one, explained the history of the place to me as we walked. After it was a TB hospital, they turned it into a state mental hospital. They didn't treat people too well back then, he said, his voice sounding far too casual for how creepy it was. We continued walking, past rooms with rusting medical equipment and cracked porcelain bathtubs that looked like they were meant for ice bath therapy. There was even a machine that looked like an old electroshock therapy device, its metal parts tarnished by time. Everything was so wrong, like something out of a nightmare. We reached a T-shaped hallway, one side leading to what I guessed was a cafeteria, the other side leading to elevators and stairs. I was about to turn toward the elevators when I spotted something odd, a chalkboard on the wall. In an impulsive teenage moment, I decided to write my name on it, sealing my presence in this haunted place forever. As I did, something caught my eye. The elevators. The doors were open, and the elevator shaft at the bottom was dark. But the moment I looked at the exit sign above, it flickered on. Then the emergency lights began glowing too. I froze. The power had been off for years. There was no electricity in the building. I turned to ask the guys if they'd seen what I saw, but before I could speak, the entire side of the building lit up. The lights from outside moved across the building, and we panicked, knowing the cops had likely spotted us. We scrambled to hide. Evan ducked behind a set of tables, Ryan to my right, and I squeezed behind the open elevator doors. For what felt like forever, we sat there, completely still, as the lights circled around us. The sound of footsteps, distant crashes, doors opening and slamming filled the air. I was shaking. I could hear the cops inside making their way through the building, but I wasn't worried about the cops anymore. The real terror came when I saw him, a man dressed as a doctor. He walked out of a room down the hallway, his gaze meeting mine for a split second. He raised his arms, turned, and walked away. I couldn't breathe. I turned to Evan and Ryan, whispering urgently, "Did you see that? Did you see the doctor?" They both shook their heads, clearly confused. I was done. There was no way I was staying here another minute. Evan and Ryan agreed it was time to leave, and we decided to give ourselves up to the cops. At least it would be over. We made our way back to the window we'd entered through, but as we reached it, a cop grabbed us, one by one, pulling us out and throwing us against the wall. "Are there any more of you?" the officer barked. "Anyone else in there with you?" I swallowed hard. "No, it's just us," I said. "Why? Did you find anyone else?" The cop met my gaze with an eerie calmness. "No, we never went inside. We just drove around the building, shining our spotlight through the windows. The weird thing is, every time we turned the corner, we saw someone walking around inside." I realized then that the sounds we heard, the things we'd seen, were not the cops. They were the ghosts of the hospital's past, patients, doctors, people who had been trapped in that place, either by illness or by cruelty. We were arrested for breaking and entering, and I was sentenced to community service. But the worst part of the experience was what happened years later, when I was watching Paranormal caught on camera. A ghost hunter investigated that very hospital and captured an apparition on film, one that looked exactly like the doctor I had seen that night. To this day, I drive past that old hospital sometimes. I can't help it. I wonder who or what I saw that night, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that there's something unfinished there, something still waiting for those who dare to trespass. If you ever think about breaking into an abandoned place, just remember, it's not only the living who don't like to be disturbed. Story 5. The Stalker from the Grocery Store. I live in northern Utah, on the edge of a quiet highway town that most people would miss if they blinked. The town's nothing special, just a few convenience stores, a truck stop, and a motel, all nestled along the main highway. The roads leading to the outskirts are dirt paths that lead to a handful of homes scattered across large private acres of forest and fields. It's peaceful, and for the most part I've never had much to worry about. It was a pretty ordinary day for me. I work remotely from home, so I finished up my tasks early and decided to take a trip into town for some groceries. The highway town wasn't busy, which I liked. It was always quiet, with hardly anyone in the stores. I pulled into the small parking lot, the faded asphalt cracked from years of sun and weather, and started grabbing the items I needed. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed a man standing at the end of one, looking over at me. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I just caught him at the wrong time, or maybe he just happened to be looking in my direction. I continued with my shopping, trying to focus on what I needed. But then, a few minutes later, I saw him again. This time, he was standing in a different aisle, just a few feet away from me, and he wasn't grabbing anything, just staring. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. I tried not to acknowledge him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I glanced over, and sure enough, his eyes were fixed on me. I decided to speak up, hoping maybe he was just socially awkward, or maybe I was overthinking it. "Hi," I said, keeping my tone casual. He didn't respond. No smile, no hello. He just continued to stand there, looking in my direction. After a moment, I hurried up, grabbing what I needed, and quickly made my way to the checkout. As I stood in line, I felt his presence again. My heart sank when I saw him standing outside the store, between a couple of parked cars. He didn't have any groceries with him, so I guessed he hadn't even checked out. I'm not sure why, but the situation made my skin crawl. Maybe it was his demeanor or the way he was lingering, but something about him didn't sit right with me. I quickly paid and left the store. I parked in the back of the lot like I usually did, hoping the out-of-sight parking spot would give me some peace of mind. I tossed my groceries in the trunk, glancing around to make sure no one was too close. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of other cars, but as I looked out, I saw him again, standing still, watching me from behind one of the vehicles. My stomach twisted. I wasn't sure if it was just paranoia setting in, or if something more sinister was going on, but either way, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I drove home, the night settling in quickly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The empty dirt roads stretched on, quiet and dark. I parked in front of my house and grabbed a couple of grocery bags, heading inside. My home is on just under an acre of land, and as I walked inside, I didn't give much thought to the truck that was parked far off near the edge of the property. It wasn't there when I drove in. I would have seen it if it had been. I tried to tell myself it was just a lost driver pulling off the highway, maybe to take a nap. It wasn't uncommon for drivers to park on the outskirts of my property when they didn't want to pay for a motel. Still, it felt off, especially since the truck had no lights on, making it almost impossible to see anything about the vehicle. I kept a wary eye on it while I put away the groceries, but after a while I decided to push it from my mind. About an hour passed and I watched TV for a bit, trying to relax. The truck hadn't moved, but by then I was starting to feel less uneasy about it. Maybe it really was just a driver taking a break. As the night wore on, I decided to call it a night. I closed the curtains and headed upstairs to bed. I'm not sure how long it was before I fell asleep, but I know it wasn't long, until I woke up suddenly, needing to use the bathroom. It was probably around 3 a.m. when I got up, still half asleep, and walked across the room to the hallway. But as soon as I opened the bathroom door, I heard something downstairs, a creak. It was subtle, but it was definitely a sound that didn't belong. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening. Then, slowly, I closed the bathroom door and opened it again to see if it was just my imagination. The creak didn't repeat. I stood at the top of the stairs trying to peer down into the dark. There wasn't much light, just a sliver of moonlight coming through the kitchen windows, but something caught my eye. A shadow, moving just slightly on the wall near the downstairs hallway. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send my heart into overdrive. I slowly backed up, quietly retreating into my room, and closed the door with as much caution as I could. I grabbed my phone and texted a close friend, but I didn't call anyone. I wasn't sure what was happening yet. Then, after a few minutes, I heard it again, the creaking sound, much more deliberate this time, like someone walking across the floor beneath me. My blood ran cold. I knew I wasn't alone. Someone was downstairs inside my house. I called the police, whispering into the phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with all the worst-case scenarios. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but time felt like it was dragging. My ears strained to hear anything else, but the only sound was the soft creak of footsteps moving through my living room. They were getting closer. Then, suddenly, I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. I held my breath, hoping it was the officers, and within moments, I heard the commotion of boots hitting the floor, running footsteps, and a flash of movement outside my window. The police had arrived. As I opened the door to meet them, I saw them chasing someone toward the field at the back of my property. They caught up to him near the truck. To my horror, I recognized him. It was the man from the store, the one who had been following me. It turned out he had been stalking me all evening, watching me from outside the store, following me home, and then breaking into my house. He had a weapon on him, something I didn't want to think about too much. His claim was that he was trying to rob me, but when the police questioned him, it seemed far more personal than that. He didn't take anything, didn't even seem interested in stealing. The officers arrested him, but I couldn't shake the fear that came with knowing he had been inside my house, possibly for hours, watching and waiting for the right moment. The scariest part? He knew I was home. He had been watching me all night, and I hadn't even realized it. I still don't know exactly what his intentions were, but I'll never forget the way he watched me in the store, or the way he snuck into my home, invisible in the night. What could have happened if the police hadn't shown up? It's a question I don't want to answer. Story 5. The Stalker at the Cabin. Last summer, I embarked on a long road trip to visit some relatives spread across several states. I wasn't in any particular rush, so I decided to take the scenic route home, making stops at small towns and quiet locations along the way. Each day consisted of about 5 to 6 hours of driving, which allowed me to really soak in the landscape. This particular night was going to be the last leg of my journey, and I was looking forward to getting home. By the time I had finished my last stop, it was already late in the afternoon. There was only one more stretch of road left, and the remaining miles were mostly uninhabited woods. I had planned to stop at another city on my route, but it was simply too far out of the way for me to justify the detour. Instead, I had booked an Airbnb for the night, a cozy little cabin a few hours away, which happened to be right on my route home. It seemed like the perfect spot to rest after a long day of driving. I left my last stop around 4 p.m., knowing the drive to the cabin would take me through remote areas. The landscape was mostly flat, with the occasional group of trees scattered around, and the road felt empty, stretching on without much to look at. But when I finally reached the cabin, it was a little unsettling in its own way. There was something eerie about the way the large pine trees were planted perfectly in a row, lining the gravel driveway. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. I parked the car and noticed a padlock on the cabin gate. Fortunately, I had received the lock code from the host, so I quickly unlocked it and made my way inside. despite the exterior being a little off-putting. The cabin itself was newly renovated and incredibly nice. It had a small, cozy feel to it, and I could tell it had been designed for Airbnb guests. It felt welcoming and homey inside, and for a moment I was relieved to be done with the road and ready to relax. After settling in, I didn't unpack much since I was only staying for the night. I sat down at the small dining table and ate a quick meal I'd picked up from a drive-thru earlier. Everything seemed normal at first, but just as I finished eating, I heard a knock at the door. It startled me since I hadn't heard a car pull up or anyone walking on the gravel. Hesitant, I stood up and went to answer it. Standing at the door was a man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with a grey and black beard and a shaved head. He smiled at me and in a calm, friendly voice said, "Hi, I just stopped by to make sure you got in okay and everything is good." I assumed he was the host, which made sense since it was a bit remote and he might just want to check in on guests. He was dressed casually and didn't seem threatening, but there was something off about him. I told him I was fine and everything was great, then said goodnight and shut the door. I thought it was a bit odd that he had shown up unannounced, but it didn't seem like a huge deal. Maybe he lived nearby or on the other side of the property. Still, there was a strange smell about him, a pungent odor, like he had been working out in the field all day. I didn't think too much of it, though. I returned to the table and finished my meal, trying to shake off the strange feeling. I decided to take a shower to unwind and relax before going to bed. The shower lasted about 15 minutes, and after drying off, I was feeling tired enough to get into bed. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through it for a bit, trying to wind down. But then, as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard another knock at the front door. This time, my stomach dropped. Again, I didn't hear any car pull up or footsteps outside. It was so sudden and out of nowhere it felt wrong. It had only been a short while since the first knock, and I had no idea why he would be coming back so soon. I checked my phone. No calls, no texts. I stood up slowly and walked into the main room, my heart racing. I could hear him knocking again, more urgently now. My unease grew, and I considered whether I should answer the door at all. But something about the situation didn't sit right with me, and I hesitated. Finally, I called out from inside the cabin, asking what he needed. He stopped knocking, but then his voice came through the door. "Can you open the door? Please, I just need to ask you one more thing. I'll be quick, I promise. B." I didn't respond at first. I wasn't sure what to do, but the situation was starting to feel increasingly uncomfortable. After a long pause, I heard another knock, this time more insistent. "Can you open it? It'll only take a minute." I didn't want to answer him, but after a few more seconds of silence, I said, "It's late, and I'm not in the mood to talk. If it's not an emergency, I'd like to be left alone. B." There was a long pause. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. Then the silence stretched on, an uncomfortable, eerie quiet. I stood there by the door, waiting for him to leave, but there was no sound of him walking away. Was he just standing there? Was he waiting for me to open the door? I was too scared to move at first, but then something caught my eye. I glanced at one of the windows in the living room and froze. I saw his eyes staring at me through the window. He was watching me. Panic set in immediately. I sprinted to the bedroom and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, whispering into the phone. I explained the situation, hoping the police would arrive soon. As I waited, I heard what sounded like him trying to lift the window from the outside. It was terrifying, and my mind raced with all the worst-case scenarios. Then, in the distance, I heard the sound of a police siren. I prayed they would get there in time. The minutes felt like hours as I listened intently. The officer arrived, and from the sound of it, he was running around the property, calling out. Soon enough, I heard the footsteps leave the house, and the man was gone. The police caught up to him near the back of the property, where his truck was parked. To my shock, I recognized him. He was the same man who had knocked on my door earlier, the one I thought was just the host. But when the officers questioned him, it was clear that he wasn't the host at all. He had been lying about who he was, and worse, he had been trying to break into my home. He didn't take anything, didn't even seem interested in stealing. His intentions were far more disturbing. The man had a weapon on him when they arrested him, and while I'm still not entirely sure what he planned to do, I'm grateful that I didn't open the door. The whole situation was completely bizarre, and to this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had let him in. I'm just glad the police arrived in time. The real host contacted me afterward, confirming that the man was not affiliated with the cabin at all. They have no idea how long he had been stalking me, but I'm just relieved I didn't fall for his lies. It was a night I'll never forget, and a reminder to always trust my instincts. Story 6. The Man with the Axe. It was spring break, and my family, just me, my mum, and my younger brother Ben, decided to take a road trip to a small cabin in northern Minnesota. Ben was only 7 at the time, full of energy and excitement. Our plan was to stay for the whole week, not just to enjoy a little getaway, but also to check out some of the smaller towns nearby as we considered the possibility of moving to the area in the future. The cabin itself was far off the beaten path, located in the wilderness, which made it a somewhat odd choice for our trip. My mum had booked it online, enticed by the affordable price, but she didn't fully realize just how remote it was. The nearest towns were about 30 minutes away, and there was no quick access to any grocery stores or shopping areas. But that's kind of what made it appealing in some ways, a place to escape the bustle of everyday life. Still, I wasn't sure how we'd handle being so far away from civilization. We set off early in the morning, the drive lasting just over 5 hours. I drove the first few hours, with my mum taking over for the rest of the way. When we finally arrived, it was just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in a beautiful orange glow over the dense, unbroken forest. It felt peaceful, like we had truly stepped into the wilderness. The sights were stunning, nothing like the concrete jungle we were used to with skyscrapers and busy streets. The cabin itself, though, was noticeably old. The wood was weathered, and it creaked with every movement. It didn't seem like it had been professionally built, but it still felt cozy, as cabins often do. I could hear the sounds of birds chirping, the wind rustling the leaves, and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. It was the perfect place to get away from the world, or so I thought. After we unpacked, we got the wood-burning fireplace going and spent the evening winding down. I ended up napping for most of the night, exhausted from the long drive. My mum and Ben had gone to bed around 10 p.m., leaving me alone in the living room. Since I had napped earlier, I wasn't particularly tired. I sat by the fire, playing on my phone, trying to unwind, when I decided to step out and get some fresh air. The back porch was small, with a few weathered chairs around a fire pit that looked like it hadn't seen much use. I could smell the crisp air of the forest as I stepped outside, the sounds of nature filling the space. There were no cars, no streetlights, no traffic, just the occasional distant bird call and the rustling of trees. It felt peaceful, though I quickly realized it was colder than I expected. Still, it was nice to be away from the chaos of city life. I noticed a stack of logs near the cabin, and I decided to try lighting the fire pit. The wood lit up easily, and I was impressed by how well the fire held up. The flames crackled as they danced in the night air, providing a warm glow against the cold dark. I was enjoying the serenity, letting the quiet of the night settle over me. It had been a long time since I had spent time in such an isolated place. But then, something unexpected happened. From deep in the forest, a sudden sharp sound echoed through the trees. It was loud, almost like the sound of an axe chopping wood, but it came from so far away it was impossible to tell exactly what it was. I froze for a moment, trying to pinpoint where the noise had come from. I looked around but could only see the dark silhouette of trees in every direction. It sounded pretty close, and the isolation of the cabin made me feel vulnerable. Still, I tried to shake it off, assuming it was just some animal or maybe even someone working nearby, but I couldn't deny the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I stayed outside for another 20 minutes, the nervous energy building in me. The fire flickered softly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sound of the axe, or whatever it was, kept repeating in my mind. It was hard to explain, but something didn't sit right. Finally, I decided to snuff out the fire and head back inside. I walked into the cabin and quietly closed the door behind me, trying to push the eerie feeling out of my mind. The warmth of the fire was replaced by a strange chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. My mum and Ben were already asleep, and the cabin was quiet again. But I still didn't feel like going to bed. Maybe it was the nap I had taken earlier, or the lingering unease, but I stayed up in the living room, watching a downloaded movie on my phone. About 30 minutes into the movie, I heard something that made my heart stop. I paused the movie and listened carefully. At first, I thought it was just the cabin creaking, the old wood settling with the wind. But then it happened again, a strange, subtle noise coming from the far side of the cabin. It wasn't from the bedrooms, it was outside the wall next to me, where the large window was. I leaned in, trying to catch the sound again, when suddenly a loud series of knocks on the front door shook the entire cabin. My blood ran cold. The knocks were heavy, hard, and insistent. They reverberated through the walls, making the whole cabin seem like it was trembling. I froze for a second, and then I heard my mum get out of bed, hurriedly walking into the hallway. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaky with fear. I was already standing up, my nerves on edge. I knew something was wrong. "Someone's at the door," I told her. My mum's face turned pale. She hurried to get her phone, dialing 911 without hesitation. There was no reason for anyone to be banging on our door out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour. I quickly moved toward the door, peeking through the peephole. It was pitch black outside, no porch lights, just the dark forest. But I could make out the figure of a man standing right in front of the door, staring straight ahead. His outline was hard to make out in the dark, but I could see the glint of something heavy in his hand, a wooden axe. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what to think. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he needed help. Maybe he was lost, but nothing made sense. The man just stood there, silent, banging on the door without saying a word. He was right there, and I could feel the tension building with every knock. The knocking continued, and just when I thought things couldn't get worse, it did. With a loud crack, the man slammed the axe against the door. I heard the metal tip of the axe puncture the wood, leaving a deep mark. That was it. I could no longer deny the danger. Panic set in. We all ran into the furthest room in the cabin, locking the door behind us. The knocks didn't stop right away. We heard a few more hits against the door, each one louder and more frantic than the last. It felt like time was standing still, but after what felt like an eternity, the banging ceased. We waited, afraid to move, unsure of what was happening. It took less than 10 minutes for the first officer to arrive at the cabin. The sound of sirens was a relief, but it didn't stop the fear from churning in my stomach. When the officer checked the front door, there were several large gashes in the wood, but the door was still intact. There was no sign that the man had gotten inside, but there was no sign of where he had gone either. It was as if he had vanished into the forest. The police theorized that the man had seen the fire from deep in the woods and decided to investigate. What he was doing out there, in the middle of nowhere with an axe, was anyone's guess. But without being able to question him, we'd never know for sure. We didn't stay at the cabin any longer that night, and we never returned. The experience left me shaken. It was a reminder of how vulnerable we can be when we're so far from civilization, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we hadn't been so lucky that night. We definitely didn't end up moving to Minnesota,